People who live in remote areas know that sometimes too much quiet can make your mind race. However, some experiences stick with people long after they occur because of the degree of creepiness. On Reddit, plenty of people who live in rural areas share their scary stories for the rest of us to freak out over. We know that often strange people linger around woods, parks, and other desolate areas. And we have all heard plenty of the kind of creepy stories that backpackers experience. However, the stories here are more than a little unpleasant to listen because the people who suffered them weren't just out and about anywhere, they were at their homes. Imagine living in the woods and looking up from your bathtub to see a face looking back at you. Or imagine finding someone in your home wearing a pillowcase over their face. The terrifying real-life stories here are the stuff of nightmares. My husband worked nights, so I'd be alone on a huge acreage. One night I go into the kitchen to make tea and I look outside to see the moon, and there's a face on the other side of the window. I scream and it wakes up my aging husky who starts to howl. Dude bolts. I call the cops and wait forever locked in my pantry. Next day my husband and I ride on horseback our whole property. We find a small makeshift cabin on the northwest corner. We find stuff stolen from our laundry line and canned stuff from our kitchen. He had pinned up selfies in the cabin he had taken while in our bed and sitting at our daughter's child-sized dinner table. When we first moved in here, I kept thinking I'd hear someone walking in the house while I was alone. It's a flood zone, so the house is on stilts and you can hear footsteps when anyone walks across the floor. Of course, this is Texas, so I just grab my handgun and go see if someone had come in. Also, my mother-in-law has a key, and when she drops in and leaves things for the family, she sometimes won't relock the door. I kept feeling like I was going to walk into a room and someone would be there. Just feeling oddly watched all day for a few days. My husband didn't think anything of it, and one night he jumped out of bed, grabbed his handgun, and started going through the house, slamming all the doors wide open. He said he heard banging in the kitchen like someone was going through the pantry. He was adamant he had heard someone. Nothing, doors still locked. My niece got home from her grandmother's house and a few nights later asked if she could sleep on a cot in our room. She's a teenager, not a small kid, so I asked her what was wrong. She didn't want to tell us because we wouldn't believe her. Just that she didn't want to be alone. She said she heard banging in the kitchen, and when she heard that or felt like someone was in the house, she would see a man in the window of her room, so she basically noped out and came to us. We let her stay, and the next day we were all a little uneasy. My husband, a notorious non-believer in the paranormal, came in looking shaken and said he had closed her door after bringing her laundry into the room, and a man had been smiling at him in the window. The windows on the house are almost 20 foot in the air because of the stilts the house sits on. I grew up in the middle of the woods in Louisiana. Our closest neighbor was 20 miles away. Our house was on a hill, and at the bottom was the creek that went through the woods for miles and miles. My grandfather would always tell us there were people living in the woods, crazy, inbred folks. On some the hills have sh*t, but I always assumed he was just trying to creep us out. So one night when I was like 8 years old, I sat in the living room watching Pearl Harbor. My father comes into the living room and tells me not to move, that he heard footsteps and the back door slam shut on his way to the bathroom. He thinks someone was in the house, and that he scared them off when he walked down the hallway to the bathroom. So he leaves the house, leaving the front door wide open, which scared the sh*t out of me. I paused the movie and just listened to silence for a couple minutes. And, of course, the guy is still inside. I'm staring out the doorway to the living room and see the top of a head peek around the corner. A head with a white sheet over it, cut and tied at the neck. I'm paralyzed, and even if I wanted to run, there'd be nowhere to go but towards this creepy-ass dude. He just stares at me for what feels like forever before he leaves towards the back of the house. The back door slams again. I just sit there and start crying until my father comes back inside. My dad tells me that as he rounded the corner to the back of the house, he caught the guy leaving out the back door. The guy sees my dad and books it down the hill. Then there's a gunshot. According to Father, my grandfather had been sitting on his porch next door and saw the guy walking toward our house, so he grabbed his gun, got back outside in time to see the guy running down the hill, and shot the dude in the leg. The guy fell, then got back up again before my grandfather could take another shot, and disappeared into the woods. By the time the cops show up, he's gone. They search but can't find the guy. They do find a rundown sort of shack a mile or so into the woods, filled with nothing but pots and pans, so that was weird. When I lived way out in the middle of nowhere, Australia, nothing but desert outside. Nearest neighbors were about 10 kilometers away. Our place was at the end of a long dirt road with only our house, no others, so no one came down there unless they were there specifically to visit us. I was taking a bath one night, look up and see a man's face staring at me through the window. Freaked the F***ck out, got out of the bath, robe on, etc., and told so, who said I probably imagined it, especially since that window was so high up no one could reach it from outside, house on stumps. I made him go look out there, and yeah, someone had gone to our shed, which was a good 500 meters away from the house, got some wooden pallets, stacked them up and peeped through my window. If it were a random peeper in an easier accessible location like a suburb, it probably would have weirded me out a little, but then got over it. But the amount of work this guy had to go to makes me remember him to this day. And wonder how the hell he got out there with no car. Did he just live on our property or nearby in the bush somewhere? When I was younger, about 5, me and my family lived in a big house that was in the woods. My bedroom was on the first floor, with a window about 15 feet wide and 6 feet tall. Huge window. It was so oddly large that we could never find curtains or blinds for it, so I just had a bare window, which was fine because, like I said, we were in the middle of the woods. I woke up in the middle of the night with that feeling of being watched, and I saw a man wearing all black, standing at my window, watching me. I screamed. And when I screamed, he ran off into the woods. When I was young, my grandmother lived in a very rural part of Ireland, and my brother and I were sent to visit her for a couple of weeks every summer. Frequently, my grandmother would send us out to do little jobs for her, bring bread or jam to neighbors, or to collect turf for the fire. One summer's day, she gave me a loaf of bread and sent me to a house about 3 or 4 miles away. The laneway to the house was narrow and lined by thick hedges, and as I was walking, I became aware of a man within the hedges who was watching me and walking the laneway with me. I was extremely frightened and ran the rest of the way. I think the woman of the house knew that something had frightened me when I arrived. She made me tea and sandwiches with my grandmother's bread and let me stay and play with her dogs until her eldest son got back so he could drive me back to my grandmother's house. Thanks, Mrs. Staunton. I still don't know who it was that was watching and following me or how long they had been doing so before I noticed. My dad owns a plot of land in south central Illinois. It consists of crop fields and woods. My dad's nephew, call him T, and his wife, B, live in a trailer next to an auction barn they own. One night, B was home alone. Their porch faces the road, and they have a street light by their circle drive, on their ground, not the road. B saw a silhouette walk across the porch, his shadow visible on the door window. She later heard scratching on the screen of a window. She had enough. She grabbed T's handgun and opened the door. There was no car in the circle drive other than her own. She screamed something like, "I got a gun and I'm not afraid to kill you." The scratching stopped. My grandparents' house is right outside of town. A neighborhood is on one side, but on all the other sides everyone has an acre or two they're sitting on, including my grandparents. So, isolated-ish. A friend and I were smoking cigarettes in the large enclosed porch one night when no one was home, and in the complete silence we heard a really loud pig squeal right next to us. It sounded like it was in the enclosed area with us. It was so loud. Sure, people have horses and chickens around. I didn't think any neighbors owned pigs though. It also didn't quite sound like a pig, more like a man making a pig noise. I can't emphasize this enough. It was one of the weirdest sounds I've ever heard. The scariest thing was how displaced the sound was. I mean, even if their next door neighbor had a pig, it would have been far enough away to be a lot quieter. We bolted inside and locked the door immediately. So I live in a very heavily wooded area. This is a place where the closest town is 7 miles away and it's only got about 100 people in it. So my family and the few neighbors we have are very secluded. Anyway, when I was about 12-ish, I was sitting on my front porch eating mac and cheese because it was a nice day out. While I'm eating, I noticed something sort of strange in the woods in front of our house. I had sat on my front porch so many times that I was used to how the view looked, so I immediately noticed that the view looked different. Probably about 150 feet in front of our house was a giant black mass. At first I thought it may be a black bear, as they are fairly common here. Being the adventurous kid I went to investigate. As I got close to it, I could see that it was actually a giant burnt black stump, root wad and all. It had been totally scorched, so the entire thing was pitch black, and it was massive. It easily weighed 200 pounds. This was strange, as we hadn't cut down any trees lately, and we certainly hadn't burned any stumps. I showed my mom and she was equally as confused, but just... I live by the Adriatic coast of Italy. One summer night of 2013, I was with some friends on the beach, having a party, when at around 1 a.m. I climbed the rocks to find a place to pee *SS. There was a full moon and I could see very clearly. I walked away from the beach until I saw a small cove, a small sandy bay, invisible from the inland but easily reachable from the rocks. I thought it was the best spot to relieve my bladder and went there. As I neared, I distinctly saw that there was a man, a fat, very big man in his 50s, sitting in the sand doing absolutely nothing, his head tucked in his arms. I should have known better, but I moved closer and asked if he needed anything, thinking he might have been feeling unwell. He raised this bull-like head and started screaming madly to get away from him lest he killed me by cracking your head on the rocks. I scrambled and ran like crazy back to my friends. I turned backwards and I was relieved to find that he wasn't following me. We called the police, who came and discovered that he was a mentally ill person who hadn't taken his medications and his family had declared missing in the afternoon. They managed to reassure him without resorting to violence and escorted him back to his habitation. It was the only time that I really feared for my life. I used to live in the middle of nowhere. We had one neighbor whose house we couldn't even see through the trees and hills. On the other side of us, up another hill, there was a dirt road that basically went nowhere. At the beginning of the dirt road there was this old abandoned church, which made it automatically creepy. Anyway, Berries used to grow down this dirt road, so we'd go pick them. On the way back one day, we got an extremely strong scent of cologne. A quick scan didn't show anyone, but every time the wind blew, we got another whiff. Still don't know where the scent was coming from, but it creeped me out big time. You don't think about how no one could hear you scream until you're forced to.